Welcome to the Real Estate Syndication Show. Whether you are a seasoned investor or building a new real estate business, this is the show for you. Whitney Sewell talks to top experts in the business. Our goal is to help you master real estate syndication. And now your host, Whitney Sewell.
Gene Trowbridge and Jonathan Ney, founding partners of the top syndication firm, Trowbridge Law Group, LLP, have a legal team with over 50 years of combined experience in real estate syndication and the practice of real estate securities law. Over this time, Gene and his partners in several past firms and currently have helped clients raise close to $5 billion in offerings by empowering entrepreneurs to raise capital legally. To learn more about Trowbridge Law Group, LLP, visit their website at trowbridgelawgroup.com or follow them on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today our guest is Kevin Riordan. Thanks for being on the show, Kevin.
Thanks, Whitney. Thanks for having me.
Kevin has worked for over 30 years in the commercial real estate industry. He has focused on making investments via mortgages, mezzanine debt, CMBS, and both a large pension plan, TIAA, and as well as a commercial mortgage REIT. He took public in 2009 called, is it Crexus Investment Corp?
That's right. Crexus Investment Corp. Right.
He currently serves on the facility at Montclair State University, teaching a variety of real estate finance courses. Kevin, you're a great guest for our show, and pleasure to have you on the show, just bringing your level of experience and expertise to our listeners. Give us a little more about who you are and what you do exactly in this space, and let's dive in.
Sure. So thanks, Whitney, again for having me on. So my background from an education perspective is I'm an accounting finance person. And I did the route, which at the time was a Big 8 route. Now it's a Big 4 route. But did that, I got CPA, worked at and then got an opportunity to work at a real estate developer in syndications in the early 80s, which was kind of a little different game back then. It was much more of a tax game. But I got to work in that environment, and I started actually working on putting some transactions together, creating the structures and the forecasts and whatnot. And I really liked it. But my role was going to be rather more limited to the accounting side of it. And I enjoyed the investment side. So I made the move to get over to TIA in 86. And that was a great run over there. And I worked from, and I always tell students this, because they like to say, hey, Professor Riordan, what'd you do? And I kind of like to give them a little, okay, here's what it works. I had an office in New Jersey at the real estate company, but I thought the opportunity was so good in New York City to work for TIA that I took a job as an assistant investment analyst sitting in a cubicle. So you give up the office, give up the privacy, but you're in a cubicle. And that turned out to be great. Over 20 years, I rose to the level of senior managing director. I ran a book of about $80 billion of commercial real estate investments, as well as residential mortgage investments. So it was a very good run. And then things changed. Obviously, this is always senior management. And then I was fortunate to land on a company that was well capitalized, but they weren't in the commercial space, and they wanted to get in the commercial space. So they hired me to create that platform. Interestingly, I thought we would do it through a private fund initiative. And one day they just turned around and said, no, we're going to do it public. And so I'm like, okay, you ever been a president, CEO of a public company? I was like, no, that doesn't happen every day. And did the roadshow. We raised initially about $300 million in equity. I did ring the bell at the exchange. We did a follow-on. So we went about $1 billion company. And it was making, Whitney, those investments that you described earlier, mortgages, CMBS, mezzanine. And so it was really it was a kind of a bank within a wrapper of a REIT. So that's the way I like to think of it. Bank within a wrapper of a REIT. And we did that. Eventually the company got acquired. And I've pursued this new career in education. Besides being on the faculty at Montclair State University, I also teach at Columbia University. I teach real estate finance in the Graduate School of Engineering. So kind of, hopefully that's not too winded.
No, that's awesome. I appreciate you just diving in there a little bit just to share what you've done. It's an incredible background and taking it public as well. Not everyone gets to do something like that,
But
what's that?
Process.
Yeah. I think you can really help us though, just thinking about what lenders think when lending money, right? And then we can get to maybe some steps or traps that that can help us improve that process. But just even as a lot of listeners are up and coming sponsors, right? And just learning how to walk that walk, right? To get to the institutional level. But why don't you get us started a little bit about just what lenders think when lending money, and help us to just understand that better.
Well, it's great, great. So, when we use the word lender, it sounds like such a generic term. Okay, we lend money for the real estate asset and we get paid back. It's so generic. But really, there are so many different slices of lending, and it's a function of, first of all, the kind of property that the sponsor is bringing forward for financing. That's one element. And then the other side to it is then the lender itself is, what type of an institution is it? How is it capitalized? How is it regulated? How is it not regulated? And historically, you had kind of three places or two places kind of to go to for money. You had on the short-term side, you had the banks and commercial banks, savings banks, right? On the short-term side. That's where I kind of started getting my chops. And then I worked for a pension fund, which was long-term money. So those were the primary places to get money. You think short-term banks, long-term life company. And that began to evolve over time, primarily because as the market blew up in the early 90s, CMBS gained a foothold, Wall Street got a foothold, and alternative means of financing using leverage, using the capital markets became a foothold. So now, Whitney, you have a bunch of different type of lenders. You still have traditional banks, you have life companies, and now you have all alternative lenders in between. So you as a sponsor coming forward and saying, where do I go? Which one do I go to? And obviously, it's a function of price. That's going to always be a determinant, how much you want to pay. But really, the thing is going to be from the sponsorship side is, what kind of asset am I bringing forward for financing? Is this a deep transitional redevelopment play that is going to require some patience by a lender, some real deep underwriting, some hands-on work back and forth, possibly between future fundings and so forth, a lot of touch and feel? That kind of situation may not be apropos to a life company, nor may it be good for a bank. It might be good for an alternative lender in between. Okay. Likewise, you may be in a position where I've got and you're thinking of your investors too, like, what return profile do I want to have for them? So I've got an asset now I want to get permanently financed. So I might go to a bank, I might go to CMBS, I might go to lenders. And there's all different reasons why you would pick one or the other, right? But let's say you do pick the CMBS route. Okay, let's say you pick the CMBS route because the pricing is so good. Capital markets are so favorable, pricing's good. Let's put servicing aside for the issue because that's a big Achilles heel in CMBS. But you say, okay, I want to go CMBS, and they'll do the financing. CMBS will be much more obliging to you if you want to get some additional financing through a mezzanine lender so that you can give more return of equity to your partners. So it's a much more favorable environment to do that kind of transaction. On the other hand, you may want to have that relationship with someone like me at a life company, and you can call me if something's not working right, and you call me and I can walk it down the hall and say, hey, I just got a call from so-and-so, and maybe you just want to put it on the shelf, lock it up, and the life company's a better place to be. So it's a kind of between, it goes back and forth, where's the appropriate place, and then what's the asset you have, and then finally, of course, what kind of financing do you want to attain? CMBS is boxed in a bit by the rating agencies in terms of what kind of assets they allow to have in a pool. Life companies can be a lot more liberal, although they can be a lot more, used to be an old commercial like Morris the cat, finicky, very finicky cat. Life companies can be very finicky. They could be like, we're not going to do any of this for the next year. And you may have the greatest asset in the world, right? It may be a home run, but the fact is they may just have too much of that kind of asset and they're not going to do it. So you may look good, your asset may look good, your performance looks good, but they just have too much of it because they are limited by portfolio concentrations, that's regulatory oversight, that's rating agency oversight. So there's a lot of other things that affect lenders that you don't see, but they should be able to give you direct responses as to, I can't do it because of this. I can't do it because of that. Okay. Not that's just like, I'm not interested.
It's interesting, like you call it a life company. Could you just talk about the difference? I know you just did. You went through the differences in those a little bit, like CMBS and life companies. I don't know that I've ever heard it called like a life company before. And so could you just elaborate on that a little bit? Because I bet that's something different for most listeners as well.
Okay, sure. So when I'm talking about life companies, I am talking in a place like TIA, even though it is a pension fund, is regulated as a life company. But its counterparts in the business are Prudential, are MetLife, Principal Financial out in Des Moines. Those are all life companies. And I had relationships with all those Pac Life out in California. I still know the guys who run those groups and some of those companies. And a life company will do more long-term financing. Why? Because their liability side is long. So they can do longer assets. Remember, the mortgage that they're lending you is an asset to the life company. So they want to get a return over a long period of time. Their liability structures are longer. So therefore, they can give you long money. When I say long money, minimum 5 years, and they can go out 10 years. So that's what a life company is. They are not they do opportunity things to do buckets of transitional construction stuff, but that's not their bread and butter. Their bread and butter is more long-term, put it on the shelf, get paid, you keep paying, and hopefully everything works. That's life company world. They're regulated by the NAIC, National Association of Insurance Commissioners, and they have a lot of, they deal with statutory accounting, not GAAP accounting. So there's a lot of little different things with behind the scenes in life company, but that's basically their long-term fixed rate money. That's where they are.
Okay.
CMBS, commercial mortgage-backed securities, a Wall Street vehicle, looks like a life company. It's long-term fixed rate financing. It looks like that. And it is that. It is that to a borrower. But the difference between a life company and CMBS is the servicing aspect. Because Wall Street will make the loan, but then sell it. And then you're sold into a place where now, if you have a servicing issue, Whitney, and this, like I said, is the Achilles heel, it's sometimes hard to get an answer. And it's hard for people to make decisions because there's a whole big legality around the trust and so forth. So that's the CMBS. And then the bank side is also, the banks are actually very interesting right now. So banks traditionally were short-term, floating rate money, construction money, transitional money, that kind of stuff. That pocket of opportunity has moved to what I call alternative lenders now. And they have popped up all over the place. They're through basically private equity firms, KKR, Starwood, all kind of Ladder Capital. All of these are alternative lenders doing some long-term stuff that looks like CMBS and will do CMBS, but they'll also look like short-term transitional guys. So they've been a very interesting thing. And I ran a panel about 1.5 years ago, and I had 3 guys, 4 I knew pretty well, talking about the amount of business they were doing as construction lenders. And they were doing a lot less. And from the regulatory environment, that looked good because, there's less construction lending, so that means there's less risk. But if you looked around, there were a lot of cranes going on. So what was happening is the alternative lenders were picking up this risk. And that's sometimes you hear it out there, Whitney, about whether there is a larger bubble of lending going on that is not under the microscope of the Fed or the FDIC, because those are non-regulated entities. Most of them are private equity. Some go public, so they're a REIT, but they're not regulated by the NAIC, the FDIC, the Fed, or anybody. So there is this large group of other lenders that are kind of maybe a little scary at times. We'll see now, given COVID, what's happening. We'll see who's, as I think Warren Buffett says, when the tide goes out, we see who's wearing clothes.
I like that. I appreciate you diving into that, Kevin, and just giving us a great explanation. Let's talk a little about how institutional investors just view up and coming sponsors.
Oh, sure. So that's the other side to it. Again, so you want to go get financing, or let's say you even want to get equity, you want to get partnership money or something like that. So this is it's a biography that you're creating for yourself. It's a resume. And I mean, it'd be great if you have a lot of money that you're coming from. That would be great. I could walk in and I've got partners and money, and that's good, right? But let's say it's like myself and you. Maybe it's not working like that. Okay. So the way it's going to work is through a track record, and it's going to have advances in what you're doing in size of not only the scope of the properties, but also the size of the properties. Okay. And what you're going to try to develop is, and what's really important, as I remember meeting young developers back in the late 80s, early 90s, trying to gather business for TIA, they would talk about how they created their accounting systems, how they created reporting systems, how they monitored their construction, how they did their credit analysis of the tenants they were putting in the buildings. Okay. All of this was detailed checklists. And so that's what you're going to be bringing if you're a newer person, because you're not going to have, Park Avenue, right? You don't have that. You've got, hopefully, remember the way it may work out with some friends and family, maybe you can buy a 20-unit multifamily to start, and then you create some value, and then you create capital out of that value, and then you do a 60 unit, right? And then you get to 120 unit. And when you start getting north of 100, that starts getting interest of certain lenders. It's just sizing, right? Because there's a lot of things to look at, and time is valuable, and it takes time to do these, to get these transactions consummated. So where would they rather spend the time? You might be the greatest guy in the world with your 60-unit apartment. I mean, they might love you, but if that's only $4 million and they can do $20 million over here, well, they're probably going to put their attention to the 20, all things being equal, just because of sizing. So again, from a new person standpoint, you're building the track record, and you're talking language of accountability in the systems you have from a portfolio perspective, from a tenant perspective, from an accounting perspective. That gives you credibility.
Wow. Yeah. Talking that language, just when you're speaking with the lender, so they can understand that your knowledge is and your scope, right? Like you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. As soon as you start talking like that, because they're faced with the same thing, right? Internally, they're faced with that. How are they performing? How do they monitor? How do they deal with problems, right? So that's all their world. So you're talking their language a little bit. I mean, it's obviously specific to what you're doing, but that is the language they understand is, process. They totally understand process. They understand checks. They don't like authoritarianism. Now, a lot of places are entrepreneurial and it's an individual, but they do like to have expertise around that so that the decisions are made not in a vacuum or made by a single person, but there is a collective view as far as the best outcome for whatever the situation is.
Wow. No, that's awesome, Kevin. And I want to just spend a couple minutes too on just helping the listener just improve that process of getting financing, maybe some traps or some steps that they need to be aware of while we just have a few minutes before we have to jump to a few final questions.
Sure. Absolutely. So, a trap, bad credit in your background, or you as a bad person is a trap. Okay. That's a simple one. You may be the best developer, you may be a great landlord in some respects, but if you have issues around bad publicity, bad headlines, people are not going to go there. That's just not worth it to them to defend the character or actions of some sponsor. So, the first thing is, do your business above board, right? Do your business above board. Number two, be transparent. Now, things can go wrong at a property, all right? I'm just talking from a business perspective. I'm not speaking anything else. This goes from a business perspective. Lost a tenant, or there was a calamity at the property, some kind of natural disaster, something like that. And that causes headlines, right? So what I would say to the sponsor, be upfront. The problem was identified, the steps were taken, and the risks were mitigated. And what was the outcome? So that gives someone comfort that if there is a situation, remember, they don't want to be in your business, Whitney. They really don't. They really want to give you money and get a coupon. They want to get paid monthly and get paid back. That's the things they want, okay? So you demonstrate an ability to manage through process, to manage through problems with thought. They will respect that. So be a good guy. It sounds kind of funny, but I think you know what I'm saying about that. But being a problem mediator and fixer is important, and to demonstrate that track record how you did that.
Yes, do your business above board. Right, do what you say you're going to do. Be transparent. All those things you mentioned just says a lot, no matter what business you're in. Right.
And you just said it. Say what you're going to do. So for example, if you said, "Hey, we're going to take this site, we're going to do this, and we're going to do that and do that," and it comes out like, well, none of that happened, right? That's not going to be good on your reputation. And I'll tell you, I will say this: lenders talk. They go to conferences together. They'd swap. I don't want to say they swap notes, but they talk about deals. And sometimes they know that someone did a deal. They go, "Wow, what'd you do that for? I passed on that." I'm like, "What'd you see in that?" And, they'll have some reason or stuff like that, but it'll be in good nature. But of course, they do compare notes, and it's known when it starts getting known when borrowers start shopping their deal around. Like, oh, 14 people said no to this piece of crap or whatever, and now you're on my door, and people know that. So there is a little, like anything, right, Whitney? There is a little close circle of people.
Kevin, how do you prepare for a downturn?
Oh, so the first thing you do is you try to hoard as much cash as you can. That's the first thing you do. So how do you do that? You probably postpone some capital improvements. Okay, that has the least immediate effect on tenants, unless of course you have to replace an HVAC unit and they have no HVAC and you live in some place that's very hot. So that's, what I'm saying. So that's the first thing. We postpone a capital improvement. The second thing is you probably, and this is really, really important, is if you have bodies in the building, however you want to call them, tenants, you got bodies, you want to keep your bodies. So how do you do that? You've got to get close to your tenants. That goes back to one of the things I said earlier. How do you know about how your tenants are? What is your credit work on your tenants? That's why that part's important. I know who they are. I know who makes the decisions. I know their financial wherewithal. So you get close to your tenants. You understand their problems, okay? You try to work with them, but the most important thing, Whitney, is to keep them there, okay? Maybe forbearance, if you have to go that way with them, but maybe you believe in them in some way you can recapture it later. But a dark building is not worth as much as having buildings with people in the building. Okay. So hoard your cash, postpone capital improvements, get close to your tenants.
Great answer. What do you see happening in the next 6 to 12 months in the real estate market?
By property type, I really question the long-term. I question CBD office quite a bit. I know that they want people to get back to that, but I will anecdotally, I see so many folks that are just like, hey, if I could just keep doing this, what you and I are doing, and I don't have to go traveling and I don't have to go commuting, well, that's great for me. So that's not a good prognosis on CBD office, nor is that a good prognosis on all of the ancillary retail that supports it around the buildings. I worked in New York City for 30 years. Right. So I know, you step onto the street there and it's all retail, right? It's all, a lot of food places, some shopping, so that has that secondary bad effect. So concerned about what we're doing right now to have a larger impact on the CBD office. I think apartments, I still hear of people wanting to move into the city. I'm a little surprised at it because it's been more of it, only because of pricing. That's really what it is. Not if you have a kid or young child, that group has been exiting quicker, and it's been creating some bubbles around house prices. We have it in Montclair here. I'm only 12 miles from New York City, by the way. I'm 12 miles west of New York City. There's been a bit of a bubble here in the resi pricing. So that's another thing. And then the final thing is I can't get my head around retail. The big shopping malls, that's really problematic. I mean, the whole thing about anchors, right? It's an anchor in a negative sense today. It drags you down. It creates a big, Lord and Taylor, J.C. Penney, right? I mean, Lord and Taylor's going out of business. J.C. Penney's, BK. I mean, Sears. Those are big empty boxes, right? Yeah. And what are you going to do with those now? You're not going to put a movie theater in because we can't go there. Can't put a food court in unless we're 25 feet from each other. So we can't do that. So the people who are going to be super creative around that will be, I think those people will make money, but I don't have that vision right now. I just don't.
Well, Kevin, I believe anyone that's successful in business, and just in this space that has a high level of self-discipline. How did you gain such a high level of self-discipline?
Oh, wow. I didn't go away to school. I kind of lived at home. We didn't have much money. And so I went to college living at home. And I've always kind of sometimes fall back on that. Like, I just feel like I just wanted to kind of do better. And it's funny when I was thinking about this the other day, my background, like I said, I lived at home. And then I got amazed, I grew up in Jersey City. It wasn't the best of neighborhoods. But my parents sent me to a good, decent high school, and college worked out okay, even though I lived at home. But it was just like, I just want to do better. And I tell this to students all the time. It's not going to fall in your lap. You got to pick up a pen. I mean, I use that in the old, they pick up phones and whatnot. But, you got to work at it. You got to work at it. And something so basic, working at your resume, working at your skills. You got to work at those. And Whitney, today I teach and I learn something every day still at school, even teaching the kids. So that's another thing. I think you can't get ever too complacent around that.
What about some daily habits that you're very disciplined about that have helped you achieve success?
I work out. It keeps it even. I keeps it even. And I read the papers. I read the papers a lot. And I really rarely watch like some, maybe a syndicated TV show like a Stranger Things or something like that. But I don't watch any of that kind. Like my kids and my wife will talk about all these people. I'm like, oh, I don't have no idea what you're talking about, So I think it's just kind of where I spend my time. I like reading history. I like reading history books. I like getting challenged in reading. Somebody can really write, and I would say to your readers, you want to read stuff that's challenging, read the original writings of Alexander Hamilton. Read those writings, okay? Read his report on manufacturers. Read his report to Congress on credit of the Treasury, okay? And think about it. He's writing this report at night under a flame, right? Drinking a lot of wine, but he's still writing it in longhand. And read this thing. And then just sit back and think about who that is that wrote that.
That's some really neat advice right there. I'll have to pull that up. That's so neat to think through that and who that person is writing that at that time.
Read that.
Number one thing that's contributed to your success.
I hate to say luck, but anticipation, right? So I recognized in 85 that the syndication business as structured back then was going to change. And they wanted to keep me in accounting. So that was going to change the whole outcome for the company. And because of that, it was going to limit the outcome of that company. And I made the move to go to TIA. By the way, that company was gone in 3 years. So anticipatory is important. When I was at the life company in the early 90s, I was a CPA, I went to a seminar, and the person said, lending is going to change significantly. It's going to be in the capital markets going forward. And this is 93. TIA was just starting to think about it. And I now have to say this nicely. I really sold myself that I'm the person to be doing this for you. And I was picked up by an individual at the company who said, I want you to do this. So that was the right place, the right time, but the foresight of where the business was going. And that was, again, so it's anticipatory, and then it's kind of just having a plan if you can see it.
How do you like to give back?
Teaching's my give back. I help kids, I do the teaching thing, but if they have to see me. I have a call today, 10:30 with a kid. He's got an interview this afternoon. He wants to talk to me. And that's like, okay, that's not like on my job thing or anything. I just do that, so that's
awesome.
Do it.
No, that's great, Kevin. It's been a pleasure to meet you and to have you on the show, Kevin. It was a great show and just helping us to think through some of these things, how a lender thinks, and especially as a new sponsor. I remember it's hard to know those things, right? It's hard to build those relationships, and you're brand new and you just don't understand. There's so many things you haven't been exposed to yet. And just appreciate you bringing some of those things out today and helping the listeners and myself just have a better understanding of that relationship and the track record that, and being transparent and problem solver and all those things, just being above board, doing what you say you're going to do, and how important that is. And even I loved your answer too, just about the what to do, or preparing for a downturn and some of those things we need to be thinking about. Are we prepared? Can we do those things and perform? Kevin, how can the listeners get in touch with you and learn more about you?
So I'm at Montclair State University, which is in Montclair, New Jersey. So the easiest way is my email, which is my last name, Riordan, Riordan, my first name, K. So Riordan K at Montclair, MONTCLAIR.edu. And we also have a public relations people up there too, so you can always find me through them.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Syndication Show, brought to you by LifeBridge Capital. LifeBridge Capital works with investors nationwide to invest in real estate, while also donating 50% of its profits to assist parents who are committing to adoption. LifeBridge Capital, making a difference, one investor and one child at a time. Connect online at www.lifebridgecapital.com for free material and videos to further your success.